So today we're going to be looking at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, which is a pretty great battle in history that, like, literally, Stamford Bridge and Hastings back to back were so pivotal in history, between the English language and the ending of the Viking Age, where Harold Godwinson defeats Hardrada, and essentially Hardrada came to invade England, and Godwinson essentially force marches and immediately catch Hardrada like unawares and unprepared. And I think the most coolest aspect of this battle is the legend around the Berserker Viking who held the bridge against the English army and single-handedly and took down a lot of, English soldiers. So that's a pretty cool, event from the unnamed Berserker. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing HistoryMarche tell it. Oh, I want to say I always put the link to the original video down below, and if you want to help me out, I would really appreciate it if you could like, comment, subscribe. We're really trying to grow the channel, guys, and I would really appreciate it. It would really help me. Thank you very much. Let's get to the video.
A hot September day in 1066, and the hastily mustered army of King Harold Godwinson closes in on the Norse host of the legendary warrior king, Harold Hardrada.
Yeah, Harold Hardrada had like quite the storied life. I think he was even a Varangian guard, like fighting for the Romans in that area and all around Europe and the world. Like, the guy was kind of a legend.
Having formed a defensive shield wall, the Norse invaders grasped their swords and battle axes. Now two iconic kings of medieval history are about to clash at the battlefield of Stamford Bridge. In 1065, there could be little doubt that the House of Godwin...
Hey, Edwin! Okay, that's cool. I never see my name pop up. That's really cool. A fellow Edwin here. Heck yeah.
...reigned supreme under the nominal rule of King Edward the Confessor. The rise of the Godwinsons to virtual dominion of the kingdom can be traced back to the emergence of the family patriarch, Godwin, as the most powerful noble of the land during the reign of Canute. Initially a retainer of First Ethelstan and then his younger brother Edmund Ironside, Godwin became the trusted lieutenant of Canute following his victory over Ironside in 1016. Marrying the sister of Canute's brother-in-law, he was also created Earl of Wessex, even acting at times as the great Danish monarch's regent.
Godwin was initially made the Earl part of Wessex, which has then later extended to the entire territory.
By Canute's death in 1035, Godwin was unquestionably one of the major players of the realm. By 1042, the tenacious Earl of Wessex had survived 3 successions, throwing his support behind the restoration of the native House of Wessex in the person of King Edward, later known as the Confessor. Throughout the Confessor's early reign, Godwin consolidated his family's power. His elder sons created earls in their own right. Godwin also had Edward marry his daughter Edith in hopes of siring a Godwinson grandson to inherit the throne. Yet not all was harmonious between the king and his mightiest subject. As a supporter of the House of Yelling, Godwin had enthusiastically guarded against Edward's bid for the throne back in 1036, even capturing his brother Alfred and handing him over to Canute's son, after which he was blinded and died of his wounds soon after. Edward had lived in exile in Normandy and northern France since his father's ousting from power by Canute, and had become thoroughly Normanized by the experience, even acting as a guardian for the young Duke of Normandy, the future William the Conqueror, during his tenure.
Wow, so they have that much history. The previous videos, obviously, Edward called William his cousin. I didn't know they had this much history with each other. Kind of makes sense of why he wanted William more on his side and even straight up named him an heir. Okay, that makes a lot more sense in my head now.
Minority. Given their dark history, Edward was at best ambivalent regarding Godwin. As an effective foreigner in his own land,
it is wild that he's working with Godwin after what happened, right? What he did to his brother and stuff. Talk about like a tense working relationship, huh?
Relied on native support and was yet unable to overlook the mighty Earl's complicity in his brother's grisly demise and his initial opposition to his restoration. Matters came to a head in 1051. Edward had spent the initial years of his reign not only courting the support of Godwin and the other major earls, but also installing his own Norman and French supporters to positions of power, most notable among them the first Norman Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert of Jumièges. Leveraging enough support to drive Godwin and his family out, it was around this time that King Edward may have promised the throne to his cousin William. However, Godwin was apparently just as influential in exile as at home, and effected a comeback just a year later, forcing his own restoration as Earl of Wessex.
He has so much power. It's kind of insane how much power and influence Godwin amassed for himself, and how Edward just has to kind of take it.
Godwin did not long enjoy his triumph, the great Earl dying at a feast with the king in 1053. Yet the death of Godwin himself did not eliminate his faction. Replacing the family patriarch was Harold, who promptly succeeded as Earl of Wessex and proved much more acceptable as a right-hand man than his allegedly murderous father. The 1050s saw an acceleration of Godwin's power that did not go unnoticed by other great men in the realm. Harold's younger brothers rose to earldoms in their own right, with Gurth taking Harold's former earldom of East Anglia, and Leofwine granted a small province of his own. Yet a major promotion was of Tostig Godwinson to the earldom of Northumbria. Elfgar, the son of the Earl of Mercia, Leofric, never sat easy with the rise of Godwinson power, and when Tostig was gifted Northumbria in 1055, he had rebelled and been exiled, even joining forces with King Edward's enemy in the Welsh king Gruffydd. Though ultimately mollified by the restoration of his earldom of East Anglia, and then his succession to his own father's major earldom in 1057, the seeds of mutual hatred between his family and Tostig were sown.
I put this in my...
By the early 1060s, the Godwinsons held most of the earldoms of the kingdom, so that by Elfgar's death, only his successor Edwin governed as a non-Godwinson. Harold's own direct influence had only expanded with his defeat of, with Tostig's aid, Gruffydd in 1063. However, if Edwin similarly smoldered at the dominance of Harold and his...
It feels so weird to hear my name mentioned. I'm just like, what? Finally, an Edwin character. Watch him about to die right now. Or something just being murdered. That would be about right.
Others, his own family would soon be presented with an opportunity to even the imbalance. 10 years into his tenure as Earl of Northumbria, Tostig had built up significant ill will towards himself. Having opponents assassinated, maintaining close ties with the ever-present threat of Malcolm, King of Scots, and finally effectively doubling the region's taxes. For the northern lords, enough was enough, and in late 1065, while their earl was absent with the king back south, they seized York and killed Tostig's officials. Appealing to the other great family of the realm, the rebels sponsored Earl Edwin's younger brother Morcar as their choice as Tostig's replacement. Tostig, however, had powerful backing. Not only was he the brother of Harold, but was also the brother-in-law and favourite of the king himself. Of all the Godwinsons, Tostig was held in the deepest affection by Edward. Yet brotherly love would not be enough to save the ousted Earl. The rebels marched south, and Harold was sent to effect a compromise and found that his choices were dire. Either he could back Tostig, as Edward willed, and potentially ignite a civil war, or he could accept Morcar as his brother's replacement, casting Tostig aside, but maintaining the peace in the face of hostility from abroad. Harold, of course, chose peace,
Wow.
and an enraged Tostig stormed off into exile, swearing vengeance against a brother who had stabbed him in the back.
That is wild. Turn on his own brother. He really valued peace that much, huh? Wow.
Meanwhile, a heartbroken King Edward now sank into terminal illness during the Christmas period, and Harold was acutely aware that the wolves would be circling outside of England to stake their own claim to the dying king's crown. A year before the ousting of Tostig, Harold had been embroiled in his own crisis while he had found himself in Normandy as the unwilling guest of Duke William. Whether there because of an accident or...
Dang, I didn't know that these two even had an encounter before Hastings this much. Apparently he was even there with chilling with Willie. No, wait, I think he was. I'm trying to remember the oversimplified video. But still, man, William met everybody. Every major player he was just chatting with, or had interactions with.
concerted effort to free his relatives who were languishing in Norman captivity, Harold had ultimately been compelled to swear an oath to support William's claim to the throne.
Oh, wait, yeah. Was this the one where I think, like I said, I'm trying to remember the oversimplified telling, but someone swore with William over holy relics. I thought it was Edward previously, but I'm wondering it was actually Harold who was the one cited to do that. But either way, I guess you can argue if he even had a choice fully with William, right?
Back on English soil, Harold likely had no intention of honouring such a promise made under duress, but was not foolish enough either to overlook the obvious ambitions of such a formidable lord. On January 5th of 1066, King Edward finally passed away, though beforehand he had charged Harold with protecting the kingdom, and another tale has Edward vaguely pointing out Harold from his deathbed. For Harold and his backers, these events and his wider support justified his coronation on January the 6th.
Yeah, he essentially rushed the coronation, right? Which also kind of shows a bit of foul play and how quickly, if he really was that legitimate, why move so quick? But then again, also, he could have just seen potential people turning on him, so... Again, a bit of both. It's a bit iffy. Either way, he basically pushed himself right away to be the king, right? Under the pretext of protecting the realm and all that.
The same day as King Edward's funeral.
Holy crap.
Yet though crowned, Harold knew he would have to fight to remain king. Duke William, of course, could be relied upon to be scheming his own invasion, and both the kings of Denmark and Norway had feasible claims to England traced back to Canute. In May, Tostig assaulted the Isle of Wight and raided along the south coast before reaching Sandwich. In response, King Harold marched to confront his brother, prompting Tostig's withdrawal.
Yeah, he really inherited, or rather, many factors created such a precarious situation for Godwinson, huh? Between William and Hardrada, and then his own brother he backstabbed, just like, he wasn't on the throne for long, but he essentially had to become a warrior king and fight for his claim, right? And I have to give it to Godwinson. He was actually a very competent commander. Him defeating, Hardrada, and then almost beating William back to back is very impressive. He's a very underrated commander, but he is impressive.
Opting to strike north, Tostig landed in Lincolnshire. Here he clashed with his hated rivals Edwin and Morcar, who similarly drove him back into the sea.
Heck
Yet
yeah.
if they
Edwin's supremacy! I'm a bit afraid because I feel like he's gonna die any moment. I'm like, oh. The only character in history we've encountered that has my name, I'm pretty happy about it. I just like the narrator keeps saying my name, I'm like really all giddy about it. Yes, you go, Edwin.
thought they had seen the last of an ineffective, if despised, rival.
Oh no, is he gonna try to get the Scottish to, like, straight up invade?
They would be sorely disappointed. Tostig travelled widely in an effort to back his ambitions with overwhelming force. Initially based in Flanders, he had audiences with Duke William of Normandy, as well as Sweyn Estridsson in Denmark, and finally Harald Sigurdsson, the awesome king of Norway. It was with the final man of the three that Tostig allied his smaller force to, in exchange for the restoration of his earldom. In theory, the exiled Godwinson could not have asked for a better backer. Of the three principal claimants of 1066, Harald of Norway was the most experienced warrior. A physical powerhouse, Harald had inherited...
Oh, dang. I'm not sure what the average height back then was for medieval Europe, but 6'6" in even nowadays, is an impressive stance, right? Oh my goodness.
Sole rule of Norway after the death of Magnus in 1047. He had spent the majority of his reign fighting the Danes, and before that had fought extensively as a mercenary captain under both Yaroslav the Wise of Kievan Rus and then the Eastern Roman Empire.
Look at this impressive resume. Like, Hardrada had such a cool life. Honestly, someone should make a series about it, because I feel like you can do a lot with this guy.
Harald's flimsy claim to England was derived from an earlier agreement forged between Magnus and the long-dead Harthacnut, where both men swore to take the other as their heir, with the first to die to inherit the other's lands, for Harthacnut including his claim to England. Regardless of any real right he had to England, Harald of Norway was not above forcing the issue through might and ore. The king agreed to link up with Tostig later that summer and press their claims with devastating force. Indeed, by the close of August, Harald set out from Norway, his sails filled with the same northerly winds that supposedly delayed Duke William in port. Landing at Cleveland, the Norse...
He disbanded and freed on September 8th, given their 2-month obligation had expired and the harvest needed to be seen to.
Army proceeded to raid and then sack Scarborough, before repelling small local forces, as well as a larger force sent by the brothers Edwin and Morcar at Holderness. Having swept aside initial resistance, the Norse fleet entered the Humber estuary, where the invaders were eagerly joined by Tostig and his Flemish mercenaries. Sailing inland to the village of Rickel, Tostig and his Norse allies headed north towards York itself, with around half the total force. It was at Fulford, just south of the city, that they finally confronted a comparable army under Edwin and Morcar. Formed up ahead before the Germany Beck, The two forces had the Ouse to their left and boggy ground to the right, making a head-on battle inevitable. Initially separated by the swollen tributary of the Ouse, the English army under the Earls were local feared units formed around the core of professional housecarl units. If not as experienced as Harald's grizzled warriors opposing them, they were still a formidable bar to the great city beyond. Directly opposing the king next to the Ouse was the division of Edwin. An experienced commander, Sigurdsson likely placed his ally Tostig, with his smaller contingent of Flemish warriors, deliberately across from his hated rival Morcar to provoke a reaction. Anchored solidly against the Ouse on one flank and the marshy ground on the other, the English army was well positioned to take a defensive stance, to soak up the blows of the invaders at their leisure. However, in what is likely a reflection of his relative inexperience, the sight of his rival and his smaller force opposite him proved too tempting a target for Morcar.
So he's just gonna go for it, right? Instead of taking it the more defensive position, I'm assuming he's just gonna go for it.
To resist, and as the waters of the swollen beck receded, he charged across, quickly driving his rival back.
I don't think that was a good idea on Mokar's part. The defensive plan before sounded much safer, especially when dealing with the veterans of Hardrada and whatnot, but Mokar's going against the plan and playing into Tossig's hands. So yeah, Mokar's trying to get himself killed.
To the left, Harald Hardrada marched towards Edwin with his larger veteran Norse host, pushing them back from the beck, before eventually fracturing their formation with much blood. What was left of Edwin's men routed towards the safety of York, while Harald halted his warriors and wheeled back south.
Yeah, Edwin seemed the more competent of the two. I'm happy about that. He didn't screw up that big, but obviously he still lost. Unlike Mokar, who's about to get jumped from the back, probably completely destroyed. Eesh. That goes to show you, like, Hardrada's fought all over the place. He has, like, great veterans. Yeah. Just the sheer power, right, of his units.
Morcar's attack had dealt severe damage to Tostig's men, and the young Earl of Northumbria was likely elated at his initial success. Yet spirits were likely shaken and then shattered as the land ravager appeared close by. Closing in to deal the death blow, Harald's warriors bludgeoned a path through Morcar's flank and rear.
My goodness. Yeah, Mokar's just dead. Well, I mean, he might survive, but I don't know, his army's dead, you know?
Pinned between both enemy forces, Morcar's warriors attempted to break out via the marshy territory, only serving to intensify losses, those English dead either being mercilessly slaughtered or perishing in the marsh. Battered and beaten, Edwin and Morcar initially fled to York, which later surrendered to the invaders on the 24th of September. Perhaps at the urging of his ally, Harald spared York, but at the cost of feeding his army and also submitting hostages, in the usual fashion, who would be handed over the next day at a specified place. Returning to Rickel, Tostig must have been in high spirits at the humiliation of his foes, and his Norse ally was one step closer to his treacherous brother's throne.
Dang it. I'm sad to watch a fellow Edwin lose. Sorry, I don't see many famous people named Edwin. Like, I know of Edwin of Northumbria, but that's about it. So it was cool to see another fellow Edwin there.
Word had quickly sped south to the ears of King Harold of the invasion. Throughout the summer, Harold had guarded the south coast against the Norman threat. Having already disbanded the Fyrd, the king took his corps of professional house.
Yeah, that's the thing, though. I think Godwinson was waiting for William to land, but wasn't it the winds that prevented William from departing quickly? At least, again, oversimplified. And that's why he showed up a little bit later, when Godwinson had already disbanded his army.
Carls and marched north, mustering new Fyrd units along the way. In a remarkable feat of speed, Harold covered
his forced marches are kind of insane. Like, he covered so many miles so quickly. I don't think Godwinson had many, like... I don't think he had any cavalry units, at least not that I can remember. At least the majority of his army was infantry. And they just hauled. They essentially booked it to quickly catch Hardrada off guard. It really is an impressive display of a forced march.
190 or so miles from London to York in around 4 days.
Insane. They were booking it, man. They were running so far. Insane.
Though impressive on the surface, it's likely much of his army was mounted. Whatever the case...
Never mind. I mean, no, it still is impressive, but I had heard sometimes saying that, like... Or was it just the one in Hastings that he didn't have much cavalry? I forget. Again, I don't want to... I'm a bit iffy on the details, so I apologize. But still beyond impressive, though. Even if mounted, that he managed to still pull that off and grab them. Get them unawares.
This swift reaction proved decisive for his prospects of victory. Hardrada had selected the site of Stamford Bridge for the handover of both the food and hostages. Monday the 25th of September was a hot day, and expecting no imminent danger, Hardrada allowed his men to discard their armor and marched with less than his total force towards the rendezvous.
Again, Godwinson caught him with his pants down. So hard, you know?
As he did so, King Harold Godwinson and his exhausted army had already arrived in nearby Tadcaster late the previous day. Here he probably learned of the fate of the army at Fulford and of York's surrender. Having briefly rested, the royal army departed Tadcaster around 6 a.m. on the 25th, reaching York some 3 hours later. At York, Harold's presence was still unknown to either those Norse at Rickle or with Hardrada himself. Fully aware of both forces, Harold chose to take on the army under Hardrada himself rather than that of the Norse at Rickle. Following the Roman road via the Gate Helmsley, the English army determinedly approached the invaders. However, remarkably, Harald of Norway and Tostig were still initially unsure of this new force.
They are so unaware, it's hilarious. Just how close Godwinson got to them without them even being sure. No wonder he won, right? That goes to show you the power of the forced march. Like, the forced marches, we've seen so many times, they've been so effective in all the wars and battles we've witnessed and seen in this channel. It really is just a really cool feat of just going from, like, Napoleon to Khalid to Bayezid, just so many successes from so many great commanders. The forced march had to play in all of them. You know?
His intent. Back at the battlefield, the invaders held both sides of the bridge, with most of their warriors on the far side. Once the stark reality of their peril set in, Tostig suggested a fighting withdrawal back to Rickle. However, Hardrada resolved to fight.
Oh,
With battle imminent,
that's interesting. I think the fighting retreat would have been better if Hardrada had managed to rendezvous with his main army, at least most of it, and lived to fight another day armed. But his decision to just stay and fight ultimately was probably the worst one in hindsight, right?
it was then that a parley ensued. King Harold rode with a small escort of housecarls to meet both Hardrada, Tostig, and their small bodyguard. Since the Norse king understood little English, it was the brothers who exchanged some tense words. Tostig was not only offered the restoration of his earldom, but in addition a third of all England to govern if he turned on his new ally. However, Tostig asked brazenly what Harald of Norway would receive, to which his brother grimly shot back, 7 feet of ground, or as much more as he needs, as he is taller than other men.
Holy crap. Dang. Straight up a threat. That's insane.
In response, Tostig rejected his brother's offer, saying he would not have it said of him that he had brought the King of Norway to England only to betray him. Hardrada
Oddly honorable on Tostig. Like, it really is oddly honorable that he did that, right? Like, he had an opportunity to just go back. Granted, he probably doesn't trust Godwinson, his brother, because of the previous betrayal. He probably doesn't trust the dude. But also, like, he stuck by Hardrada, which again, I think is kind of oddly honorable on his part. I really like that aspect.
had not understood the words spoken, but had caught onto the body language of Harold well enough. Following Tostig back to their army, he asked who it was that spoke so brashly, to which Tostig revealed it was his brother. Hardrada angrily retorted that if he had known, he would have slew Harold there and then.
Dang.
The diplomatic
Yeah, well, that would have been a diplomatic crisis, right? If he had just killed him. The parley. I know parleys being, like, between leaders. I don't think you were supposed to kill people in them, right? Like, surely there was a rule? I mean, I don't know, actually, but it would seem to be incredibly, like, I don't know, dishonorable, I suppose, but that depends if they even care about that. I'm not sure how much rules there were in parleys, but yeah.
niceties set aside, the battle erupted around the bridge, with the smaller Norse vanguard attempting to hold out long enough for their comrades on the far side to form a decent shield wall. If Harold had significant amounts of archers, he may have used them in his attack, though what happens next suggests otherwise, or more indicates a chivalric streak of admiration on part of the English. His comrades either slain or driven back across the narrow bridge, a single unnamed Norwegian Ajax now guarded the passage to his comrades beyond. The bridge itself was certainly narrow enough to be covered by the great swings of his Dane axe, this warrior's blows easily hewing through mail, splintering shields and hacking away.
That's insane. That's such an insane tale of history. One dude was holding off the entire English army. They literally, I think the story goes that they had a dude on, like, some type of, like, barrel or something, rode down the river and stabbed the berserker basically in the balls under the bridge just to get rid of him. They needed to rely on that trickery just to get rid of this dude. That is if that happened. That's the famous story that I've heard of how it went. But also, yeah, it seems like archery could have easily dealt with this. Like I said, I'm not sure if he had any, or he just decided, nah, I don't know.
Flesh and bone. Repeatedly slaying 40 men, the housecarls, themselves deadly axemen, pulled back to offer mercy in recognition of this Norseman's great skill and courage. However, it became all too clear that this Norse, Horatius, had every intention of falling where he stood.
Yeah, this dude gets the MVP award for Hardrada's side. He carried on his own.
Branding them as a pack of cowards unable to overcome but one man, the Englishman lost all patience. Sending a man under the bridge, a spear was thrust up and into the unguarded region beneath the warrior's chainmail.
Dang.
Their tormentor finally overcome, the English now poured across the bridge.
That was a wild episode of history, but such a cool one. A rip Berserker, right? Berserker Viking. So I don't think I've ever heard him have been named with an official name, but oh well, either way, rip, man.
The forward Norse warriors had done their work well, as they had held back the English onslaught for much longer than expected. Harald Sigurdsson had pulled his main body back to deploy on some high ground. His battle line was long but relatively shallow, the Norse king having refused his flanks into a circular formation, placing himself under his banner, the Land Ravager, in the center along with Tostig. Yet despite this, the odds were stacked against them. Outnumbered and mostly without armor, the shield wall was eventually breached, the Norsemen butchered in their hundreds.
Yeah, Hardrada probably should have booked it when he had the chance, and, like, rendezvous, get it armor, get his main host, you know what I mean? Brave on him to stand, but I think in hindsight a very bad decision.
At this crucial point, Hardrada charged into the thick of his foes, possibly dual-wielding a great battle axe and sword. However, even in his berserker fury, the great Norse king was struck down, the saga stating he sank to his death with an arrow to the throat.
Dang.
The king of Norway's fall would undoubtedly have been a blow to the hearts of his men, though did not cause an instant collapse of his army. A pause in the fighting did allow for King Harald to offer mercy once again to the surviving Norse if they submitted. However, Tostig, ever defiant, merely took up Land Ravager and resolved to fight to the death, which he, along with his Flemish mercenaries, duly did. The blood price exacted on both sides was high, yet even as this latest round of battle died down, a new threat emerged on the horizon. In the moments before the battle, Hardrada had rejected Tostig's call for a fighting retreat, but had dispatched 3 of his swiftest riders to fetch the rest of his army from Rickel. In a feat similarly impressive to Harold Godwinson's own march north, Eystein Orri had led the remaining fully armored Norse warriors
Wow. Oh, that's cool.
towards the battle, but all too late. To compound the day's misfortunes for the Norsemen, their armor and a hot day exhausted them sufficiently to weaken their attack. Likely pressing some local guides into service, they approached the English from the flank. Enraged at the news of the fall of their king, this final stage of the fighting was particularly ferocious, though ultimately futile, and appropriately called Orri's Storm in the Norwegian tradition. Harold Godwinson had achieved a remarkable victory that day, though at a staggering loss. Chasing the survivors back to their ships, Harold magnanimously offered Olaf, the surviving son of Hardrada, mercy if he gave his oath to leave and never again attack England.
And just like that, he ended the Viking Age, essentially, or this battle's kind of pivotal in that. And that goes to show you, just like, this was a really awesome battle for Godwinson. He was a great commander in his own right. very underrated because of his loss in Hastings, but let us not forget that this dude is a beast in his own right.
If the sagas are to be believed, only 24 of the 300 original Norse ships were needed to ferry the pitiful remnant of the Norse army back to Norway.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Harold not only rejoiced at his victory, but dutifully recovered his brother's battered body, having him buried in York. Alas, Harold would not long enjoy his greatest triumph, as soon after he received news of yet another invasion. The long-anticipated Norman landing had come, and now Harold marched south to ultimately face his destiny at the battlefield of Hastings.
King Harold feasted in York with his men to celebrate the great victory. However, on October 1st, a messenger arrived from southern England, bringing news that Duke William of Normandy had landed on Sussex on September 28. Harold gathered his northern levies and marched back south to meet the Norman threat. Yeah, he had no time to really rest. He had to force march there and then force march immediately back, right? In a fitting tribute, Harold buried Hardrada in the good English earth. The body of the Norwegian king was moved to Norway, first to Mary Church in Tornholm, and then to the Helgester Privory, which was demolished in the 17th century. In 2006, it was reported that Harold's body was now located under a road built on the site of the monastery. Explored the possibility of exhuming the king and reinterring him in the cathedral, but the plan was abandoned. Oh wow.
If you enjoy sacrifice for as little as $1,
that was awesome. Like I said, Godwinson's underrated, but I think he is a great commander on his own, and that was such a cool battle. And I'm looking forward to when we wrap this all up tomorrow in the Battle of Hastings. Bye, everyone.